Now, if you remember back in 2009, I did a 2009 movie viewing mentions video. Well, as I've got majority of the views up nowadays, my computer was acting up dodgy again, I know, but moving on. In between that time, I've seen, now this is sad, I've counted how many, 23 movies, but I'm going to go and see another movie soon, so I'll include that. Anyway, I'm going to do a 2010 movie viewing mentions, only this time there's going to be 4 parts. I know, it's going to be a bit long. And for Wet Boy 40, before I start, I promise your Spider-Man 3 review will be coming soon. I just wanted to get these out of the way first, then that's the next thing on my list. So here we go. So this is part 1 for 2010 movie viewing mentions. Now, the first movie on this list is the one that I saw, that was released in 2009, but I saw it in 2010. So here we go, and Sherlock Holmes, starring Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law. Now, I have to say I really like this movie. It's directed by Guy Ritchie, who's directed such films as Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch and Rock and Roller. And I think he's done a pretty good job with those ones so far. But, at least the ones I've seen anyway. And this movie I found it to be probably his best work, actually. I think that it had a really good, mentionable, memorable story. Well, it wasn't too memorable, but the story itself was pretty engaging, and Robert Downey Jr. owned it, Sherlock Holmes. And a coincidence I'm talking about Robert Downey Jr. when he's in Iron Man 2 out right now. Strange, isn't it? Mark Strong was particularly good as the main villain. Real menacing right there. If you listen to the trailer, you'll know what we're talking about. And Rachel McAdams, unfortunately, she didn't do as much for the story as she could have done, but nonetheless, she still looks hot, so I'm not going to complain. The flaws, I will admit, is that it was a little bit long, a little too reliant on humour for me, but also, Robert Downey Jr. sometimes spoke his lines and I couldn't understand half of what he was saying. So, there you go. But 4 stars out of 5, Sherlock Holmes. And if I forget to mention the plots, just look Wikipedia them or something, unless you already know them. Next is The Road. Now this stars Viggo Mortensen, who, if you don't know him, played Aragorn in the amazing and epic Lord of the Rings trilogy. And he stars as a man who, him and his son, basically just try to survive in the war and look for rays of hope. And I have to say, this is probably one of the best films I've seen so far this year. It was a deeply impactful and emotional film, and I really couldn't believe that I actually didn't cry through this, because I'm a statue when it comes to crying. But the ending itself was very powerful. You really felt for the characters quite a lot, but not to mention the fact it takes place in a post-apocalyptic world, I thought was just really, really interesting. Again, the flaw is that they could have said what made it happen, even though there are hints of it in the movie. But nonetheless, 4.5 stars out of 5 for The Road. Next, now finally, a proper vampire film, Daybreakers. Now, I will admit, people are too harsh on Twilight, I think. I know I've contradicted myself there, but I'm saying the first film was good. Second one was close to shite. I'm sorry for swearing there, but it was close to pants. Simply because too much drama, not enough action. But Daybreakers for me, it's, despite being a bit slow and maybe a teeny tiny bit predictable, and it ended in a kind of a similar way to 28 Days Later, in some ways. Apart from that, I loved it. I fucking love this movie. It really had gory elements to it, and I remember after watching it, I said to one of my friends and said, that was so good. It actually made the Twilight vampires look like a bunch of babies, and they don't know how to do their job properly. But Twilight vampires, let's admit it, folks, they're pussies, okay? I'm sorry to insult fans of Twilight, but in my opinion, the Twilight vampires, especially after watching the second film, are a bunch of wussies who do not know how to be vampires. 4.5 stars out of 5 for Daybreakers. Next is The Book of Eli. Strange voice. Moving on. The Book of Eli. Now this stars Denzel Washington. And yeah, unlike The Road, it's another post-apocalyptic movie about how he's got a book that he's, yes, obvious, that he's determined to protect. Meanwhile, the main villain, played by Gary Oldman, is determined to stop him as he feels that he could control the world with this one book that would make people obey him. Now, this was a very good, interesting premise. And I would say I loved it, but I would admit that it had too many multiple endings, and it was a bit slow in the beginning. It kind of starts off at a dragging pace, then it goes really good, then the ending it just goes all over the place and just doesn't know what it wants to do. But nonetheless, acting is top notch. Even Mila Kunis, who I hadn't seen her in anything before, good heart scale, I must admit, but she was particularly good. She was so-so in the movie. You know, her acting was subpar, just about average for me. Denzel Washington was pretty good, but he didn't do too much noticeable. Gary Oldman I thought was terrific. You know, as the first movie I've seen him in, we actually portrayed a villain. Weird. So 4 stars out of 5 for The Book of Eli. Next, Edge of Darkness. Now, this movie is directed by Martin Campbell, who, if you don't know, directed the box office smash hit Casino Royale. Very good James Bond film. You've only seen that in Quantum of Solace. Moving on from that fact. Edge of Darkness. Now, this stars Mel Gibson. Now, basically, this story is about him trying to not get revenge, but investigate the brutal, I must say, brutal, gruesome death of his daughter. And it's just basically trying to solve a murder mystery and seeing who's behind it and whatnot. It sounds like a premise that's been done before, though. You know, and I think the movie itself was just too long. It was too slow. The good things about it, though, there are some. It definitely defines itself as a thriller, and it definitely deserves to after watching the film. But you know, I think that Edge of Darkness, the problem with it is that it just didn't. There was just something missing. I don't know what it was, but there was just something not quite right. But moving on, I'm going to give Edge of Darkness 3.5 stars out of 5. It was good. It was somewhat enjoyable, but just not really magnificent or anything. Far from it. Now, the last movie on the list for this part of this video is All About Steve. Now, this is a film all about Steve. Now, it stars Sandra Bullock and Bradley Cooper, Thomas Hayden Church. Now, Thomas Hayden Church, of course, played Sandman in Spider-Man 3. And I'm going to tell you what I thought of that movie when I did the review. But Bradley Cooper, I've seen him in Yes Man, and more recently than that, The Hangover. Actually, no, it's not more recently. But he's a so-so actor. Now, Sandra Bullock. Now, I've only seen her in the 2 Speed movies, and really, she does a so-so performance here. She just doesn't. She kind of plays this typical, more insane-ish type woman, and it's pretty well it's something we've all seen before from her. But basically, the plot is Sandra Bullock plays Mary, who just basically wants to go out with Steve, played by Bradley Cooper, after their parents hook him up on a date. So that's all it is. Just her chasing him around continents and whatnot, and whichever you call them, counties. You know, but the movie itself was sluggish. I mean, the beginning was so-so. It was alright, you know. The middle act was awful. I mean, it was just so uninteresting, and I couldn't care less for what was going on. And the ending did somewhat redeem the movie. But I would have to say that it's a 2.5. I think this might be the worst I've seen this year, I'm afraid. So, 2.5 stars out of 5. It was a so-so movie. It just... I don't think I'd want to watch it again. At least not for a good long time. So that is the end of part... I wish I could carry on further, but we'll just have to wait until the next video. So, that's the end of part 1. And stay tuned for next time for part 2, for the next list of 6 movies. And I think they're pretty good ones as well. See you guys.